the moment her mother-in-law laughed and said, "You are just the cousin who got lucky raising someone else's child," I realized this birthday party was never meant to celebrate her, it was meant to erase me. I had raised my maternal cousin alone, from the day her parents walked away, through fevers, school admissions, and sleepless nights. And now, under warm fairy lights and polite applause, I was being reduced to nothing. The room smelled of expensive perfume and cake. People avoided my eyes. My cousin froze beside the cake, her smile trembling. I could hear the soft clink of glasses, the pause in music, the expectation that I would swallow the insult quietly. My chest tightened, not with anger but with clarity. I stood up slowly, smoothing my sleeves, my voice steady despite the weight of years behind it. I looked directly at her mother-in-law and said calmly, "Before you speak about my place here, do you even know who I am?" The silence that followed was heavier than any insult. I was never meant to be visible in rooms like this. I learned that early. My name is Sarah, and for most of my adult life, I lived in the background of other people's stories. When my maternal cousin was born, her parents disappeared quietly, the way people do when responsibility feels heavier than love. I was 22 then. No husband. No savings. Just a small rented room and a decision that nobody applauded. I became her guardian without paperwork, without ceremonies. I learned how to soothe a crying baby at dawn and how to argue with school officers by afternoon. I worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, and celebrated her birthdays with homemade cakes and borrowed decorations. People praised me politely, then moved on. Sacrifice is respected only when it stays silent. As she grew older, I remained just the cousin. At family gatherings, my opinions were overlooked. When she succeeded, others took credit. When she struggled, I was expected to fix it quietly. I accepted it because love does not always demand recognition, or so I told myself. Then she married into a family that valued titles, appearances, and hierarchy. Her mother-in-law spoke often about lineage and status, never once asking who raised the girl she was proud to present. I noticed how she addressed me without warmth, how my presence was acknowledged only when something practical was needed. I had learned to stay calm in rooms that underestimated me. But that night, watching my cousin stand between gratitude and fear, something shifted. I realized silence had trained them to believe I had none. The disrespect did not arrive loudly. It came in fragments, delivered with smiles and soft voices that left no visible bruise. At the party, I noticed how her mother-in-law corrected the guest list in front of me, casually removing my name from the family table and suggesting I sit with the help. Her words were polite, but her eyes lingered just long enough to measure my reaction. When relatives asked how my cousin and I were connected, she answered before I could. "Oh, she just helped out when the girl was young," she said, as if years of raising a child could be summarized in a sentence meant to shrink me. I watched heads nod, understanding shaped by convenience, not truth. The music paused briefly between songs. In that silence, she joked about how real parents eventually step aside. Laughter followed, careful and uncertain. I felt my fingers curl around my glass, the cold seeping into my palm. My cousin avoided my gaze, torn between loyalty and survival in her new family. There were other moments. A compliment that ended in comparison. A request delivered like an order. A deliberate pause before acknowledging me when others were watching. Each one small enough to deny if questioned, but together they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. I stayed composed, listening more than speaking. I watched how people learn permission from the loudest voice in the room. And I understood something important then. Respect was being redistributed in real time, and silence was being mistaken for acceptance. By the time the candles were lit, the tension had settled quietly in my chest. Not anger. Awareness. The kind that arrives when you realize the next moment will decide how the rest of the night, and perhaps much more, will be remembered. The turning point did not arrive with a raised voice or a dramatic gesture. It came when the birthday cake was rolled out and everyone was asked to gather closer. My cousin stood there, hands folded, smiling the way people do when they are trying not to upset anyone. I recognized that smile. I had taught her that survival skill myself. Her mother-in-law took the microphone and began speaking about family honor, about who truly belongs and who supports from the sidelines. Then her gaze landed on me again. She said lightly, "Some people confuse sacrifice with authority." The words were wrapped in laughter, but the message was clear. Something settled inside me. I realized I was not being tested. I was being erased in public so that my silence could become permanent. And for the first time, I understood that staying quiet would not protect my cousin either. It would only teach them how far they could go. I stood up slowly. Chairs shifted. Conversations thinned. I could feel the attention turn toward me, not with concern but curiosity. I did not rush. I let the room feel the pause. Years of restraint sharpened into calm precision. I looked at her mother-in-law and spoke evenly, without accusation or apology. "Before you decide where I stand," I said, "you should know who made the decisions you now benefit from." The room went still. No gasps. No interruptions. Just a sudden awareness that something had changed. I had not attacked. I had not defended myself emotionally. I had simply stepped into a truth they had never asked about. In that moment, I knew I would not sit back down until I finished. The silence told me I had already succeeded. I did not plan this moment in advance, but I was prepared for it in ways they could not see. Years of handling responsibility alone had trained me to think ahead, to keep records, to understand systems quietly. When you raise a child without support, you learn that documentation is power. I had paid for her schooling, medical care, and living expenses. I had signed forms when no one else showed up. When she received a scholarship and later married, legal acknowledgments were required. My name appeared on documents her new family had never bothered to read. I never mentioned it because I did not need gratitude. I needed security. As I stood there, I did not reveal everything. Smart action does not overwhelm. It selects. I calmly explained my role in measured sentences, referencing dates, decisions, and responsibilities without emotion. Not as a complaint, but as a clarification. I watched faces change as people began recalculating their assumptions. Her mother-in-law tried to interrupt, but I paused, just long enough to reclaim control without raising my voice. Authority does not rush. I explained that certain arrangements existed because of my guardianship, arrangements that affected inheritance planning, family records, and long-term obligations. Nothing dramatic. Nothing threatening. Just facts. I was careful not to embarrass my cousin. I spoke in a way that protected her dignity while making my presence undeniable. Silent revenge works best when it aligns with truth, not cruelty. By the time I finished, the room understood something important. I had not stepped forward to argue. I had stepped forward to establish reality. And reality, once spoken calmly, does not need reinforcement. I ended my words and did not add anything else. That was the most important part. I let the silence do the work people usually try to force with explanations. The microphone remained in my hand for a second longer, then I placed it gently back on the stand and returned to my seat. The shift in the room was immediate and unmistakable. Conversations did not resume right away. People looked at her mother-in-law, then at me, then back again, as if reassessing a story they thought they already knew. I noticed how her smile stiffened, how her fingers tightened around her shawl. She did not respond. She could not, without revealing more than she intended. My cousin's shoulders relaxed slightly. She did not speak, but her eyes found mine, filled with something close to relief. For the first time that evening, she stood straighter. No one asked me to move seats again. A chair was quietly pulled out at the family table, no announcement required. The cake was cut. The music resumed, softer than before. Guests approached me one by one, not with apologies, but with a new tone. Questions replaced assumptions. Respect replaced tolerance. I answered politely, briefly, without feeding the moment more than it deserved. Her mother-in-law remained distant, speaking less, observing more. The authority she had displayed earlier dissolved without confrontation. That is how quiet consequences work. They do not arrive with impact. They settle in. I tasted the cake then. It was sweet, but not as satisfying as watching balance return to a room that had forgotten who built its foundation. The days after the party were quieter, but the change was permanent. Messages started coming in, carefully worded, asking for clarity rather than offering blame. Family members who had never acknowledged my role before now referenced it openly, as if it had always been obvious. No one admitted wrongdoing, but behavior shifted. That was enough. Her mother-in-law did not confront me. Instead, she adjusted. Invitations became respectful. Conversations became measured. Power rarely apologizes, it recalibrates. I understood that and did not expect more. What mattered was that the line had been drawn, and it was no longer invisible. My cousin began calling me more often, not in panic or guilt, but in ease. She spoke freely again. The unspoken tension between gratitude and obligation softened into something healthier. Our relationship did not change in form, but it regained balance. She no longer felt like she had to choose between survival and loyalty. As for me, something internal shifted. Years of being overlooked had trained me to minimize myself. That night reversed the habit. I realized self-worth is not reclaimed through confrontation, but through presence. By standing calmly in truth, I did not just protect my role in her life. I restored my own. This matters because many people recognize this position. The one who builds quietly. The one whose effort is absorbed into the background until it is convenient to forget. Silence can feel noble, but it often teaches others how to treat you. The consequence of that night was not revenge in the dramatic sense. It was correction. And correction, when it arrives calmly, has a way of lasting. I did not walk away from that night feeling victorious in the way stories often promise. There was no thrill, no rush. What I felt instead was alignment. My actions finally matched the weight of the life I had lived quietly for years. I understood then that revenge does not always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like clarity. Like refusing to shrink so others can feel taller. By speaking calmly and stopping when the truth was complete, I allowed everyone to carry their own discomfort home with them. That discomfort belonged to them, not to me. In the weeks that followed, I noticed how little I needed validation anymore. I stopped explaining myself unnecessarily. I stopped filling silences. Respect began meeting me where I stood, not where I tried to prove myself to be. That was the real shift. My cousin grew into her marriage with more confidence. She learned quietly that loyalty and self-respect do not have to cancel each other out. I did not lecture her. I did not demand gratitude. I let my example settle where words could not. Looking back, I realize I did not reclaim my place in that family. I clarified it. And in doing so, I clarified something even more important within myself. I was never invisible. I had simply been surrounded by people who benefited from my silence. The future feels lighter now. Not because everything is perfect, but because I no longer carry the weight of being misunderstood by choice. If something like that happens again, I know exactly who I am and how to stand. I did not lose years raising someone else's child. I built a life strong enough to speak for itself when I finally let it.